Hello and welcome to Healthy Bites. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Today I want to talk about connections. I think we're being reminded throughout this pandemic that physical connection is really important. It's something that in a world where we have become so preoccupied with our online world, where we have maybe hundreds or even thousands of friends or followers and all of those things that online life brings us, the actual connection face to face is so critically important. In one of the recent Healthy Bites, I was relating the work of, or the book about humankind, and at the end of it referenced Polyvagal Theory. Polyvagal Theory is really extending our understanding of stress, and you can imagine how excited I was when I started to hear about it, because I thought I knew a thing or two about stress, and this just opened up a whole new chapter, and I'm very pleased to be doing a whole program on that now with Professor Stephen Porges, who is the founder of he's the founder of that polyvagal theory. And basically many of you would be familiar with the idea that our autonomic nervous system, that part of our nervous system that is automatic, that we don't think about, is divided up into sympathetic and parasympathetic. And you will have heard that sympathetic is the fight or flight when we're faced with danger or stress, and parasympathetic is the rest and digest. But there is another aspect to it as well, and that is when things are actually life-threatening. And rather than fight or flight, we freeze. And that in polyvagal theory is something which occurs when people experience trauma. And we've done a program with Sarah Woodhouse, Dr. Sarah Woodhouse, on trauma, and with Jackie Stone, and we've talked about anxiety and depression, etc. So I think the takeaway from those discussions and from my reading of this so far, and I'll keep you posted on this, polyvagal theory, is it's not the event that is that critical, it's actually the response to the event. Because what may be life-threatening or extreme danger to you, in which to one person may just roll off your back, like water off a duck's back, as they say, to someone else. So the event itself isn't as significant as the response itself. And this actually is reassuring, because I know when I was writing my book, and I've said this many times too, that when it comes to emotional stress, our response is really our greatest defense. And I use the analogy of being on a roller coaster, which I hated, and I was on that roller coaster with a friend of mine, and he just loved it. And when we came off, I was pale. I think every physical indicator would indicate that I had just experienced one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Whereas my friend, on the other hand, was so excited and so elated, and the adrenaline was pumping, and he couldn't wait to get back on again. And yet we had both experienced the same physical experience of being on a roller coaster, and yet our response to it was totally different. And so the event is not as critical as the response. And polyvagal theory is so interesting because it talks about particularly the vagus nerve, which is one of the cranial nerves. There are 12 cranial nerves, and the vagus nerve has a dorsal branch which extends into our hindbrain, or the reptilian part of our brain, and most living higher animals have the vagus nerve. But what separates us as higher mammals is that we have a ventral branch of the vagus nerve, which is linked to our heart and our internal organs, which actually responds to facial expressions and cues. And so we, as humans, co-regulate. For example, a young baby who is newly born and can finally focus, say at about 2 or 3 months, and is looking longingly up at people who peer down into their crib, if we speak to them in very calm and reassuring tones, then they respond and they co-regulate in a very positive way. However, if we suddenly make noise which alarms them or shocks them, they will start crying. So that is built into us really from birth, this ability to co-regulate. And I'm really excited to be learning more about the more nuanced stress response that I'm learning about through this polyvagal theory. But connections, back to connections, because how we connect with people, how we connect with our work is particularly important. And many of you may remember at the end of most podcasts, I'm reminding you now that we are about to launch an online wellness program, and I'm particularly going to be focusing, well, it'll be open to individuals and families, of course, that's a major focus, but we're going to be really focusing also on the corporate world, because there are so many people that work in a business, and it's kind of quite alarming to learn how disconnected people are from their work. Let me share with you this study, one of the biggest studies. In fact, this was done by the Gallup company. You may have heard of the Gallup poll. Conducted the most detailed study ever carried out of how people across the world feel about their work. They literally studied millions of workers across 142 countries. Now, this was 10 years ago. This actual excerpt came from a terrific book by an author, Johann Harari, and the book was called Lost Connections. And Johann Hari will be out in Australia, will be participating in a conference by Mind Medicine Australia, and we're going to be talking to its CEO, Tanya de Jong, in the next few weeks. But he is going to be one of the speakers, and Lost Connections is very much about what Mind Medicine Australia does. But I digress. Let's go back to this study. I'm just acknowledging my source here, because this is the book from which this came from, but it really jumped out at me. And here was what those millions of workers across 142 countries had to say about their work. The study found that just 13% of people say they are engaged in their jobs, which they define as being enthusiastic about and committed to their work and contribute to their organisation in a positive manner. 13%. Now, the biggest group, 63%, were not engaged, which was defined as sleepwalking through their day, through their workday, putting time but not energy or passion into their work. So I guess they were kind of indifferent, 63%. Here's the really amazing part, and that is a further 24% are actively disengaged. And Gallup explained that they aren't just unhappy at their work, they're busy acting out their unhappiness. Every day, these workers undermine what their engaged co-workers accomplish, and actively disengaged employees are more or less out to damage their company. Quite breathtaking, really. Almost double the number of people are actively disengaged and trying to sabotage their work than are actually engaged, while the middle group of 63% are not engaged at all. So that means that 87% of people would recognise at least a little bit of themselves in this study. So that is quite sobering. And in my book and on this podcast, we've explored the work of Martin Seligman, Professor Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology. And he's identified a Perma model for establishing health and well-being. And this relates very much to people's work environment, because we do spend so much time at work, and it is one of the reasons why we're going to be focusing our wellness program, directing it particularly towards corporations. Not just corporations, anybody of course will be more than happy to join our community, but this is why I'm also focusing on corporates. And that is the Perma model, P-E-R-M-A. And more recently he added an extra letter. So Perma, the P stands for positive emotions, the importance of positive emotions on our well-being. E stands for engagement. How engaged are you in what you are doing in your life? That could relate to the work you do or the relationships you're involved in. But from this study, it was clear that 87% of people at work are not engaged or actively disengaged from their work. So that's quite alarming. So P-E-R, is relationships, and this comes back to connections, and this comes back to the lesson that we have learned through this pandemic, in case we needed reminding of it. But it references the work of the longest study in health and well-being ever undertaken, and that's out of Harvard. It's a 75 plus years study which has followed groups of individuals over that period and looked at all sorts of variables from blood pressure, cholesterol level, smoking, etc., and found that the best predictor of health and well-being was meaningful relationships. So if you are fortunate enough to have a significant others, that's great. But it doesn't just mean that. It means families, it means friends, it means community, it means people at work, maybe in social clubs, churches, or sporting facilities, who knows. But it is about relationships. So PERM, M stands for meaning. Meaning, is there meaning in what you are doing? Is there meaning? Do you find meaning in your pastimes, in your work time, in your family time? So meaning is critically important, and the A, PERMA, stands for acknowledgement or accomplishment. Are you being acknowledged? Are you accomplishing things within your work environment? And perhaps this is part of the frustration that people find so disengaged from their work. Is there meaning? Are they accomplishing real important things in their work? And finally, more recently, the letter H has been added to the PERMAH model, and H stands for health, because it's been realised that without health, it is difficult to be PERMA. So health is critically important, which comes back to our model of holistic healthcare, which is all about identifying and minimising the stresses in life that have the potential to compromise your immune function and promote chronic inflammation, the common denominator in all diseases, chronic inflammation and compromised immune function. And to that effect, our holistic health model, as you will know to any regular listener, is looking at emotional, environmental, postural, nutritional and dental stresses. While we're trying to identify and minimise those stressors that compromise immune function and promote inflammation, on the other hand, we are trying to build resilience by focusing on the 5 pillars of health. Sleep and breathe, absolutely foundational. Nourish, move and think. And if the metaphor is a balancing beam, it pivots on our genes and how our genes express themselves. And that is called epigenetics. So this is the focus of our online wellness program, but I wanted to share with you some of those rather disturbing statistics about people's connection or lack of connection with work, a reminder about how important connections are, as though we needed reminding about that in this current pandemic, and establishing some really exciting things that are going to be happening. I know I'm always getting excited, but this really is exciting. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions.